加白加白，来猴，大家好，我是谢哲青，欢迎收看《zalan见识南岛》。2021年11月，在英国格拉斯哥刚结束的 COP26 里面，达成了几项气候协议，虽然不甚满意，但是全世界呢也看到了，在这个气候协定上又往前一步。实际上，跨过了公元2000年之后气候变迁这个问题越来越严重。从早些年我们所看到的温室效应、地球暖化，到了这个气候变迁，你可以看到这个名词的演进，代表它的影响的范围越来越大，而且它的影响也越来越深。那关于这样子的一个议题的进展呢，也另外一个让它浮出来了，也就是气候正义。南太平洋的这些小小的国家，实际上在全世界的碳排放里面，他们达不到0.1%，可是这些国家却承受了大部分气候变迁所带来的灾害，包括我们所熟悉的像马绍尔、东加，然后图瓦鲁，甚至于是这个萨摩亚，有许许多多这些太平洋的国家正面临了气候变迁所带来的灾害。那对于生活在21世纪今天的我们，应该怎么样去看待、去思考，甚至于去应对未来逐渐在发生的气候变迁呢？那今天我们邀请到的2位朋友都是重量级的讲者，分别从不同的角度，让我们来看到如何运用传统的智慧来因应这个自然的变化。首先要先把目光拉到距离台湾7200公里以外的国家。那图瓦鲁是一个非常有趣的太平洋岛国，总共有9个环礁，土地面积26平方公里，人口1万出头，那是地球上第4小的国家。虽然觉得国家领土很小，但是它的海域非常的重要所以包括了海域、公海的部分是地球上最重要的生态跟渔猎的场所。所以为什么我们要来认识，甚至要来跟图瓦鲁来结成深厚的邦交？而在今天呢，要透过涂莉梅大使的观点，让我们来看看图瓦鲁在面对这个气候变迁的过程，甚至于这块土地极有可能是地球上第一个因为气候变迁而消失的国土。那到底图瓦鲁人要怎么样来面对未来呢？让我们用最热烈的掌声，一起来欢迎图瓦鲁大使涂莉梅。
Tuvalu is in the Central Pacific Ocean. Rising temperatures has resulted in more intense and frequent storm surges, rising sea level, low rainfall, and frequent droughts. Climate change is an existential threat that needs action now for the survival of Tuvalu's statehood, land, culture, and identity. Good afternoon, Talofa everyone. My presentation today will be looking at the climate action for the survival of Tuvalu's statehood and identity. The outline of my presentation, firstly, I will be looking at the brief introduction of Tuvalu. We'll look at the Tuvalu culture, the legislative and national policy framework. We will also look at the climate change, the impacts, and also the legislative and national framework related to climate change. Then we will look at the actions, what government is doing to address the issue of climate change impacts, and we will summarize and then the conclusion. Tuvalu is in the Central Pacific Ocean. It's the smallest independent state. It is south of Kiribati, north of Fiji, and to the west are Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. And to the east are Samoa, Tokelau, and Wallis and Futuna. Tuvalu consists of 9 atoll and reef islands, spread on land area of 26 square kilometers, and with an exclusive economic zone of around 900,000 square kilometers. Tuvalu's land is poor, it's flat, The highest point is about 4 meters above sea level. The GDP is around 45 million US dollars for 2020 figures. Tuvalu is isolated and remote. The nearest metropolitan is around 4,000 kilometers away. And the languages, we have our own native language, Tuvaluan. We have English as our official language. And also we have one island using another language, Kiribati. Tuvalu Constitution, the culture is enshrined in the preambles as one of its 3 main pillars, which include Christian principles, the rule of law, and culture. We have the Tuvalu Cultural Council Act 1999. We also have the Falekaupule Act 1999, which focus on the return of the leadership, roles, and authority. Also, our successive national strategic plan, we call it Tekakenga, the first, the second, and the third. And also the current one, we call it Tekete, all acknowledge our culture. We also have our Tuvalu National Cultural Policy Strategic Plan for 2018 to 2024. Culture is foundation to the identity of the people of Tuvalu. Cultural values, the norms and traditional practices, which include the interdependence, consensus, and hospitality. Culture also includes the dance and arts, our feasting, our way of living, the religion. Also, culture among the islands are diverse, though they are united within the principles of the enshrined in the Constitution. Culture underpins the ability of people to live and thrive in the island environments. There's a sense of people connection to the land, the community, and the sea. Tuvalu also have its traditional farming. They have their main crops called pulaka. They also have their poultry, which include chicken and pig. These are good examples of sustainable farming. And also traditional fishing practices that support our traditional sustainable livelihoods. Our strong community-based cultural values support the traditional safety nets, even with overseas communities for resilient communities. Tuvalu people also do care and share with each other within the community. They also cooperate, do volunteering work within community and also with their development work. We also have a part of the culture, the intangible cultural heritage, which include the practices, the representation, the knowledge, the skills, as well as instruments, the objectives, and artifacts, part of our culture. Examples of intangible cultural heritage includes the fatele, we call it, that's the Tuvalu traditional performing arts. We also have alofa, that's the presentation of performing arts and gifts to visitors and guests, and also traditional craftsmanship. Intangible cultural heritage, which include the buildings, the monuments, and some of the archaeological sites. There's an ancient settlement of the people in one of the islands of Tuvalu, the island of Waitupu. We call it Punatau. We also have our Falekaupule, our island meeting hall, maintain the importance of cultural functions and traditional governance. And it also serves as a multi-purpose center. Tuvalu has a national archives and library with a safeguard documentary heritage. However, we don't have a national museum. Tuvalu language is used in school, starting from kindergarten up to secondary levels. Religion is also part of our culture. The majority of the people of Tuvalu, they are Christians, and 90% of the population are under the Protestant Church. On climate change, the legislative and national framework, we have the Climate Change and Disaster Survival Fund Act 2015, and also the Climate Change Resilience Act 2019. Also, our national strategic plan, the past plans, including the current one, also acknowledge climate change as a component of the National Development Platform. The National Climate Change Policy 2012 to 2021, we call it the CANIVA, and also the Tuvalu National Strategic Plan for Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management. With regard to climate change impact, Tuvalu is living with the realities of climate change and sea level rise. Rising temperatures has resulted in more intense and frequent storm surges, rising sea level, low rainfall and frequent droughts, warming oceans and coral bleaching. Tropical Cyclone Plan in 2015 and Tropical Cyclone Tino in 2020, they have affected the whole population of Tuvalu, all the islands, with flooding and inundation on all the islands, and also there's a lot of damages to residential and public infrastructure. Food crops, including coconut tree, taro, swamp taro, bulaka, the vegetables, gardens, and livestock are being affected during those cyclones. And it also displaced about almost half of the population of Tuvalu. People living along the western coastlines, they move inland to safer places where they can continue their way of living. Rising sea level, coastal erosion leads to loss of land, inundation of low-lying areas. Saltwater intrusion have affected groundwater, destroyed our crops, and make it very difficult for people of Tuvalu to grow them. It also displaced people living the coastline to much better places inland. Tuvalu also faced the problem with low rainfall and frequent droughts. The water level in water storage units are very low, and households will have to make choices on the usage of water because the water is rationed to all households. It also affects livelihoods due to limited water supplies. It affects crops and gardening and livestock, and also affects construction works and developments in the islands. The government has been working in trying to address the issues of climate change. They have to build resilience through focusing on adaptation projects like coastal protection, building seawalls, land reclamations, and also replanting plants in coastal areas. Tuvalu has a 100% target of renewable energy by year 2025. It's also focusing on energy efficiency and also using renewable energy appliances. Food security is another issue. The government is focusing on replanting coconuts in all the islands and also using new technology to help in growing crops and also new salt-tolerant crops that can grow in Tuvalu. To increase the water storage capacity, government is providing water tanks to households and also community water systems. Also revive traditional ways of farming and preserving food, and also building the capacity and resilience of the communities through training and workshops, so they are better equipped how to adapt themselves to the impacts of climate change. Tuvalu has also established its survival fund to finance climate change programs and also to respond promptly to disasters such as tropical cyclones. It also continues to secure increased funding from global climate financing facilities. Tuvalu will continue its advocacy for climate change as the nation's greatest existential threat. The statehood must be respected and recognized as a sovereign right, regardless of whether the population is displaced or loses land territory due to the climate change. Climate change is also a shared global problem that needs everyone's cooperation and responsibilities. Tuvalu also continue to urge high polluters to cut down their emissions to 1.5 degrees Celsius. One of government's initiatives, which has launched recently, is the Tuvalu Future Now project. We call it in our language, zalan, that is preparing today to secure tomorrow. There are 3 components to this project. First is to promote our Tuvaluan cultural values, our communal living, our shared responsibility, and good neighbor in order to address climate change. Second is to secure the international recognition of Tuvalu's statehood and its maritime boundaries as permanent, despite the effects of sea level rise and climate change. Third is to create a digital nation. It needs to digitize all government's administrative services and digital archives of Tuvalu's history and cultural practices. In summary, Tuvalu has a strong and living culture for being interconnected, caring and sharing, consensus, and hospitality. Tuvalu is living with the realities of climate change, which has affected its cultural way of living, farming, and displaced people to new places. Climate change impacts has prompted Tuvalu to build its resilience and adaptation. Tuvalu will continue its advocacy for Tuvalu's survival, statehood, land, and urge high polluters to cut down their greenhouse gas emission in order to reduce global warming. People don't want to leave their land, their home, their culture, and don't want to lose their identity. In conclusion, I would like to stress that climate change is an existential threat that needs action now for the survival of Tuvalu's statehood, land, culture, and identity. Fartailasi, thank you.
人类的活动，那产生的我们的二氧化碳，那这个二氧化碳呢，它会造成我们的温室效应。好，那这个温室效应之后，我们的温度会上升，所以大家可以看到 slide 上面，我们的地球已经变黄色了哈。那如果变成红色的话，那大家可能就无法生存。